I'm Roddy Gow, the founder and chairman of the Asia Scotland Institute. And we're enormously grateful to David Miliband and his team from the International Rescue Committee for joining us today to talk about the work that they do worldwide and especially in Asia. The issue of helping those moving and refugees driven by political and sometimes also environmental issues is extremely important. And we look forward in the coming minutes to learn more about the work that they're doing. We're going to start off with a message from David Miliband, the President and Chief Executive Officer, which he has recorded in advance of this webinar, since he has unfortunately been called to the United Nations for a meeting in New York. But we're very pleased also to have with us key members of his team: Sanna Johnson, Regional Vice President; Adnan Junaid, Country Director, Pakistan; Manish Agrawal, Country Director, Bangladesh; and Undariya Tumusukh, Regional Gender Advisor, Asia, who will explain the committee's work in Asia promoting survival, protection, recovery, and renewal. And this will be followed by a question and answer session. We are, of course, living in a time of pressing and growing humanitarian need. More than 65 million people have been displaced by conflict or disaster, and half are children. And compounding this global crisis, the families desperate for safety, and even the humanitarian workers who endeavour to help them, are increasingly under assault. So a very important subject, which at the Asia Scotland Institute, we are delighted to be hosting a conversation on. Thank you.
First of all, if I may, I'd like to pass over to Sanna, who is going to take us through a brief presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug, and our sincere thanks to the Asia Scotland Institute for inviting us. We are very excited to be here, and we feel like we are coming to all of you with who all have a very deep knowledge about Asia. So we hope we will complement your already existing knowledge and understanding of the region, but also hopefully maybe give our angle to what we see. First of all, on behalf of our CEO and Vice President, Mr. David Miliband, I do an excuse on his behalf. He has been called to a high-level meeting with the United Nations around the existing COVID pandemic we are seeing across the globe, and where, of course, we, together with the UN organization, governments, national and international NGOs, are doing our uttermost to protect the citizens across the globe, but also the most vulnerable one. David have, though, sent a message, so we will start with that one. And I trust and hope any question to David, hopefully we can reply on it. And if not else, I will for sure assure that it reaches him with a proper reply to everyone.
Hi, my name is David Miliband, President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee. Thank you so much for your interest in our work. I'm very pleased you're going to get to hear from our Regional Vice President, Sanna Johnson, and the Country Director of our Pakistan program, Adnan Junaid. The International Rescue Committee is a global humanitarian charity and the largest refugee resettlement agency in the United States. Around the world, we work in 35 to 40 war-torn or refugee-hosting countries, helping people whose lives are shattered by conflict and disaster survive, recover, and gain control of their lives. We know the danger of trying to do everything, so we have a clear focus and a real commitment that our work has enduring impact. That's why we put such a premium on ensuring that our work is evidence-based, that it delivers cost effectiveness as well as cost efficiency, and that we embrace innovation and research. We're now the largest agency in the humanitarian sector doing impact evaluations. All of this speaks to the history of the organization. We were founded by Albert Einstein in the 1930s to rescue Jews and intellectuals from Nazi-occupied Europe. And we've built on that extraordinary foundation laid by a man called Varian Fry, who was the first employee of the International Rescue Committee, working in Marseille to rescue about 2,000 people from the occupation. Today, we work in about 200 field sites in the 35 to 40 countries that I referenced. We have about 13,000 employees and 17,000 day volunteers. In total, a staff of around 30,000. And those are in the vast main local people. We hire locally because it's their expertise that helps us navigate the local systems and deliver on our commitment to enduring impact. I'm very proud of the way in which our Asia presence has expanded. Sorry as well, because it means there are more problems for us to solve. We have a long-standing presence in Afghanistan and have added to that a very significant Pakistan program. Our program in Thailand and in Myanmar is also long-standing, but over the last 2.5 years, we've obviously had to establish ourselves in Bangladesh, where 1 million Rohingya have fled or been driven out of Myanmar, of Burma. And so we now have a significant regional presence. We also run a refugee resettlement processing center in Malaysia, which helps prepare, or in normal circumstances, helps prepare refugees to come to the United States for the lucky few who are on the refugee resettlement route. We're now a large organization, but private support is absolutely key. About 3/4 of our money comes from government donors, and of course we're very grateful to them for the confidence that they and their taxpayers put in us. But it's our private money that helps us get the flexibility, the innovation, the embrace of risk that is so important in a fast-changing humanitarian sector. We've got a bold vision for how we want the organization to change and the sector to change. We want to add to our commitment to evidence-based interventions, more engagement with clients. We want to do better in the way that we achieve scale by working with partners. We're diversifying our staffing base and our leadership. We're also ensuring that we ally our influence to innovation, because innovation is the lifeblood of this organization. We know that there are many calls on people's attention and on their philanthropy at the moment. But the refugee crisis, the displacement crisis, is at record levels. More people displaced by conflict and persecution than any time since World War II. That means there are about 29.5 million, 30 million refugees and asylum seekers who have been driven out of their own country. And there are about 40 million or so internally displaced, people who've been rendered homeless inside their own country. Sadly, the Asian region shows some of these facets, but of course this is a global problem which we try and address on a global scale. We have headquarters in New York, but we also have regional headquarters in Nairobi, in Amman, and in Berlin. So welcome to a truly global organization, an organization that has a strong sense of purpose and a strong sense of mission, and an organization that wants to find new and entrepreneurial partners to help the world's most vulnerable people survive, recover, and gain control of their lives. Thank you very much indeed.
So as David mentioned, we are then a global organization, and as the map shows here, of course, we are primarily in countries which maybe many of you would link to conflict and crisis. And for us, working in conflict means that we are in places who experience wars. We are working very much in countries who are also heavily impacted by the climate changes we have seen and increasingly are seeing. And we are, of course, working in countries who are recipient of refugees who either are fleeing or are, as David mentioned, welcome to new countries. So across the globe, we have approximately 32 countries, which are our permanent offices, but we are also opening and closing offices depending on where a crisis are occurring. The very big yellow belt you see over the United States is showing that inside the United States, we are also doing a lot of work, not only towards, let's say, the US government, but actually in 26 cities, from Texas to Los Angeles, down to San Francisco, we are actually receiving refugees who have been allowed to resettle in the United States. And when the time was good, we had over 80,000 refugees arriving annually. Now, today, we are unfortunately down on a quota of 4,500. And of course, for us living in Europe, we can say that those numbers are rather low. But anyway, an important thing to keep in mind, because at times we have even taken governors to court because they refuse to take refugees from Middle East. In Asia then, this is a region really warm at heart for us as IRC and the International Rescue Committee, because here we are having the oldest continuously running country programs there are in our organization. The oldest one is actually the one in Thailand, which today many people do just see as a tourist country. But we arrived in Thailand in the times of the Vietnamese boat refugees. And of course, parallel today, we had 60 years of absolute military dictatorship in Myanmar or Burma. And the latter is actually why we still are in Thailand today. We are operational in 9 refugee camps who still host over 83,000 Burmese refugees who are primarily coming from the southeast of Myanmar. And in these camps, we are delivering health services. That goes for mothers delivering babies, to assure immunization, to assure that HIV infected patients are getting the medicines they have the right to ask for. All in really good collaboration, and I would say in graciousness of the Thai government, even if it's now a military government. They are controlling the in and out of the camps, but in the same time, they are a very good partner. And we saw it now under the COVID epidemic, where we immediately were invited to train even the military and to assure that the in and out of the camps were controlled. And knock on wood, we haven't had one case of COVID in the camps. And as you may know, in Thailand, the cases has been very few, though we initially feared that it would be way worse. We then, early on, and which of course Adnan will elaborate on, responded to the Afghan refugee crisis, which occurred in the very late 70s, early 80s. We then moved back into Afghanistan under the Taliban rule and are constantly there. Afghanistan is an enormously complex environment to operate in. Not only do we have Iran as a neighbor on one side, they are also having the Chinese Belt Road going straight through, complex relations to the neighbor Pakistan. But despite that, and of course, as you will see in another slide, they are having very high levels of internal displacement, and a large number of Afghans are still living outside their own border. We came to Myanmar because of climate impact, I would say. It was the Cyclone Nargis in 2008 who made us arrive into country and do an immediate life-saving operation. And after that, we have stayed on working on economic livelihood opportunities, crossed the coastline for over 103 villages. We came into Rakhine, which of course has been in media for the last close to 3 years because of the situation for the Rohingya minority group. And we came when the first atrocities were seen. We responded to the camp, which are in the middle of Rakhine, Sitwe, where we have over 120,000 refugees living still and has been living since 2012. In August 25, 2017, we experienced, I would say, one of the most horrific exoduses and atrocities to a population we have seen in recent years. The mass exodus of the Rohingyas led to that we, in October 2017, started to respond also in Bangladesh, which Manish will talk more about. To this then, we have a very strong belief in that why should we do things when there are good partners doing it as well as we, or even better at times? So we work with very strong partners in the Philippines, a country which are heavily impacted of typhoons annually, literally cycles. And we're also working with 2 very dear partners in Japan, and both because, of course, the challenges they have seen because of earthquakes, but they are also really good with their presence in countries like Nepal, Bhutan, and elsewhere. Asia is, of course, a gigantic continent and are representing 60% of the world population. It is a dynamic region with rapid economic growth. In the same time, we have over 783 million people living in absolute poverty. And when we speak about that, we talk about a person living with less than $2 a day. So really, the gap is enormous. If we then add that the second largest refugee group is also hosted in the region, the Afghans, where we today have 1.4 million Afghans continuously living in Pakistan. We have 2 million registered refugees living in Iran. Adding, so they are then in themselves 3 million, but we actually do have another million unregistered refugees, 2.5 million, sorry, registered, but also another million unregistered refugees living in Iran. We then have the million Rohingya refugees living in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. And of course, there are other pockets of Bhutanese refugees. We have Cambodians still living in Vietnam. So the region is really heavily populated. When we say IDPs, it stands for internally displaced populations. And that are people who are moving internally of their own countries because of either climate impact or conflict. And needless to say again, unfortunately, Afghanistan is the place who are hosting today over 1 million people who have not only fled from maybe the place of original birth, but they have then fled into maybe cities, and from there they have been moved out because of attacks from what we call different armed opposition groups. There is another group which really are discussed, and that is actually people who are considered to be stateless. And you are stateless if you are not carrying a passport or a citizenship from the country where you are residing. We have over 1.4 million of those in the region, which of course make them extremely vulnerable and totally unprotected, why our own protection program is critical for their rights and for their right to exist and having protection. So as a regional vice president, it's a fancy title, but I am extremely fortunate then for us as IRC to have 4,300 dedicated staff members across the region who day and night over the weekends are working to ensure that the most vulnerable population in this large region are getting the services they have the right to. In the region, we are known for our health program. Last year, we reached over 500,000 people with advanced health interventions, from newborn health to immunization programs, fresh water programs, to then protection to persons who are living with HIV or been affected by dengue fever. We are doing large-scale education programs, and these programs are always in close collaboration with Minister of Education and the governments. Last year, 1.4 million children were given education in collaboration with ourselves and governments. We are doing protection programs, and protection programs for us is that at times we are giving legal advice for refugees living in refugee situations. We are helping women who have been victims of domestic violence, but we are also working to ensure birth registration for children who are born in refugee situation. So that portfolio is really important, and it's one of the critical things for any individual to actually be able to say, I have a birth certificate, and therefore I have the right to an ID card, I have the right to become a student, get a job. So the protection programming we do is really, really important from any point of view in a person's life. We do this with gracious support from, as David were mentioning, primarily from institutional donors and governments. We are really grateful for the British government who annually are supporting us with approximately plus minus £20 million a year for the work in the various countries we are. We have a very big support from the US government. The European Union is a close partner to us, as is the German, the Australians, various parts of the UN family as well. And then, of course, private donors who we couldn't live without, both because they are usually very brave in allowing us to test new innovative ways of doing education, which Manish will speak about. And they are also more willing to take risk-filled programming to their heart as post-abortion care. With that, we will now move in to Pakistan, and I thereby hand over to Adnan Junaid, our country director. And we start with giving a little bit of a glimpse what we have done in the COVID pandemic.
Thank you very much, Sanna, and thank you to the Asia Scotland Institute for allowing us this opportunity. I'll quickly share some of the facts of IRC's work in Pakistan. We have been, as Sanna mentioned, one of the oldest IRC country operations. It's coming to 40 years and counting. We started back in 1979 while we responded to the Afghan refugee influx from the neighboring country, Afghanistan, and since then have been responding to all the major disaster all along, with whether it's the earthquake in 2005, the super floods in 2010, and recently the disaster risk reduction activities around 2019. And IRC has been working across Pakistan, primarily with the IDPs, the displaced population, and the refugees all along for the last 40 years. If you could move on to the next slide, Sanna. A little bit of facts on Pakistan. It's a huge population, 212 million people and counting. In terms of the Human Development Index ranking, Pakistan ranks at 152 out of the 189 countries, which kind of indicates the situation of the social and economic situation and well-being and the access to services for the general population. Also, unfortunately, Pakistan also ranks 148 out of the 186 countries on the Gender Parity Index globally, which kind of indicates the state of women and adolescent girls in terms of protection of their rights and empowerment, both from social point of view and from financial and empowerment point of view. As Sanna mentioned, the population living under $2 a day is 60.3% in Pakistan. IRC has been, as I said, active for the last 40 years. In the last 5 years, we have reached over 3.3 million people from displaced locations, refugees, women, children, and adolescent girls. And these numbers, it is important to mention, are direct counting, which means most of these people that we have served, the clients, have received multiple support in the form of livelihoods, education, health services, and cash assistance, and other thematic areas that we have been working in. The current portfolio of IRC in Pakistan for this year is around $11 million, working across depth and breadth of sectors. We are working all across Pakistan, as you can see on the map, in all provinces, with the 220 dedicated staff, but also volunteers and incentive workers, and quite a 12 to 14 national partners. During the recent COVID-19, in the first 4 to 5 months, we have reached out to around 11.15 million people through our mass awareness campaigns, services on distributing PPEs through governments, running hospitals in 3 provinces of the country, as you have seen in the video clip. That was the hospital, first dedicated COVID hospital that was set up from the scratch by IRC with its partners, and is still being run by IRC. So on the next slide, please. Could move. In terms of our focus in Pakistan, as I mentioned, we work with all the populations, from displaced people to refugees and the host communities. But our main focus has been for the last 2.5, 3 years has been on women, girls, differently abled people, and transgender. As you can see, and the sectors that we have been working in has been protection, empowerment, and inclusion and safeguarding. I would particularly like to highlight the picture on the right. This is something that we introduced, one of the innovative ways of presenting a secluded segment of our society, which are transgender, which we have been working with for the last 1.5 years. So we introduced the first animated transgender hero in Pakistan, with video clips that were disseminated through social media, Twitter, YouTube, and we presented the transgender as a hero in disseminating messages and awareness around COVID prevention and protection, which was received with high degree of appreciation across Pakistan and also by the community, the transgender community. I'll talk more about in the next slide. If you could move on, Sanna. So as I mentioned, this segment is a particularly a segment in the society which has always been secluded and outcasted, if I may use the word, in Pakistan. Most of the transgender community has been earning their living by performing at the wedding functions or dance parties in the country. So when the COVID impacted everyone in the country and globally, this was the segment that was affected the most. They were neglected anyways. In the words of Wajid Ali on the left, who is not only the member of the Peshawar transgender community, but also is an assistant with IRC on gender equality and social inclusion. And in his words, as he would like to claim himself, that during the COVID, the people have started viewing each other with suspicion, but the transgender have always been viewed as disgust in public for no fault of their own. So this was the situation that they have been living in and still living in. But with the support of IRC, reaching out to them, breaking that stigmatization, those silos, we've reached out to them, we've organized them, and Wajid Ali not only supported the community, you can see the faces on the right, through the assistance provided by IRC in terms of providing hand washing station, cash assistance, and other services through non-food items. But also Wajid Ali helped them link with other social safety nets of the government and non-governmental organizations. So this is one of the major achievement of IRC in Pakistan for the first time, that a transgender and a secluded and outcasted community has been supported to be mainstreamed within the society and have been able to change the purview and perceptions of the people to some extent. With this, I hand over to, I believe, to my colleague Manish, who will take you through for the work we have done in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adnan bhai. Hello everyone. A very good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. And I'm going to take you through IRC program in Bangladesh in very, very brief. We'll start with a quick Sanna, can you please move on?
Sana halere enguri goyere ta sana harana nerere abar etuna enguri di abar etuna enguri dere ta sana hari mara sundar lagai sana hal lagai la apa nize kushi lagai atu Barmata tala barmada sekolah zabiche 3 din azala barmata tara faja sekolah makala ta makale dagu geta maga dore lo jata hari pilihan telo puli marpoza ara barmata side ara dudura funda mai doma mai ara tu ekan tu ina rendendra gori ara tu awaje halbar awaje gola wani maja halbar awaje Kalau tala apa barman kita lah betul, tak ada manusia kita le kusi lagi kalau tala kari, dari santai tala.
So you have seen these adults and girls doing some traditional makeup, but it's also not just traditional makeup, but it's also about their cultural identity, which they carry from the Myanmar. And unfortunately, they are now stateless people. As Sanna mentioned, there are 1.4 million people currently in Asia who are stateless, and out of that, almost 1 million people are these Rohingya community who is currently living in Bangladesh, and they don't have any identity. So this video was all about how IRC is working with adults and girls through their traditional and cultural aspects, and having them, healing process, relaxation. So they come to the safe spaces which are constructed and now being managed by IRC, and having some good time there, which is really helping them to come out of those trauma. So after this video, let me take you now to the Bangladesh as a country context. So on your left side, if you can see, Bangladesh is again one of the highly populated country with 161 million population. And if you look at average age, it's quite young country, I must say, and with a lot of potential, with just 25.7 as an average age, which shows how what potential we have through the young population. We also have quite progressive economy with 7.9% GDP growth. But then there are flip sides where we have quite less diverse economy, and it's highly dominated by the garment sector. So that's where experts have a lot of concerns that how to really diversify Bangladesh economy, which is currently fully dependent on garment sector. We also have quite high percentage of child labor in Bangladesh, and on your right side, if you see, we have literacy rate, which is 72%. In as comparing in 2020, it's not something which we can proud of. But it's also about not just enrollment, but it's also about the quality of education. And then we have health indicator, which shows how difficult the situation is, especially for the mothers who are giving birth, as well as the infant mortality rate, which is also quite high, not only in comparison to other South Asian countries, but in the world. And if you look at the health facilities, which are only 8 hospital beds over 10,000 people. So some of these indicators shows there's a lot to do in case of Bangladesh, while Bangladesh is one of the country which has achieved quite a lot in the previous Sustainable Development Goal, and now in the previous MDG, the Millennium Development Goal, and now in the Sustainable Development Goal, but a lot more to be done. Sanna, please move on. So here we have the Rohingya context, and many of you may be aware that we have a massive crisis in Bangladesh, and there's 1 million plus people who have already come to Bangladesh, and this crisis is not just very new. It has been since last 40 years, but the major influx happened in 2017, which a large population came to Bangladesh, and unfortunately, Bangladesh is currently hosting the biggest camp in the world of refugees, which is close to 650,000 people living in one single camp in a place called Kutupalong in Cox's Bazar district of Bangladesh, which is southern belt. And the other irony is that these people are living in very, very undulating land. It's quite hardship for them, where you have ups and downs. The area is quite close to coastal, so there's a lot of monsoon flooding happen areas quite often. So it's quite vulnerable situation, especially for women who are involved in household. Have a lot of hardship in terms of carrying out, be it in terms of water and other household needs. Population density is quite high, as I already mentioned. When we look at the population, composition, we have large amount of women who have, experience of last 2.5 years of our program in Bangladesh, have played a significant role in this respect by providing support to NGO community, government, UN in delivering of life-saving assistance as a volunteer, as an incentive worker. But at the same time, they are highly vulnerable to domestic violence and other gender-based violence, I must say. So quite vulnerable population. If you look at the 55% population belong to children, and we have 500,000 children currently. And some of you may be aware that Bangladesh government did not approve the formal education system for Rohingya children until very recently, when they agreed that approval from government of Bangladesh also did not materialize. So you can imagine, the whole generation is at stake, where we have children who are not doing anything and sitting idle and losing, a huge population within the Rohingya community. We have these population which is currently fixed within the camp, and there are fencing now. Government is also in doing some fencing of the camp, so there are movement barrier and very, very limited access to life-saving services because the population size is quite high. Sanna, please. So here we have IRC program, and I must say that IRC program is the youngest program of IRC in Asia region, which we started in 2017 when this influx happened from Rohingya community from Myanmar. And in last 2.5 years, we have reached over 350,000 people within Rohingya community, as well as Bangladeshi host community in the surrounding areas. And if you look at your left side, we have different sectors in which we work. The health sector programming is the biggest programming, and where we are delivering life-saving assistance in form of the primary health care like communicable, non-communicable disease, vaccination. Mothers gives safe birth to the babies. But also, most importantly, we are doing work around sexual and reproductive health, where not only we are providing services on the family planning, but as I mentioned, that there are a lot of gender-based violence happening, and that's where clinical management of rape, psychosocial support. So those are critical services which we are able to provide in our health facilities. After that, we also have programming around women protection and empowerment, where we work with both women and men to prevent and respond to the gender-based violence cases, where we are providing services to women who have gone through various forms of gender-based violence. So we have women and girls safe space, which you also saw in the video when I started this presentation. So those women and girls come to those safe spaces for seeking support. And especially, we also have adult scan programming, where we are also working on the empowerment of the adult scan girls. IRC globally has Girl Shine module, which runs through various phases, and that helps in terms of empowerment of the adult scan girls. Then we also have child protection programming, where primarily we help children protected. As I mentioned, that there are trafficking risks. Children are also involved in the child labor, and there are different types of abuse they go through. So that's where our team provide them services on the child protection. But at the same time, there are children who have been separated from their families. So IRC is also helping them to be united, to remain united with the family, with their respective families. Then we have protection and rule of law type of programming, which is again quite important protection program, as Sanna mentioned in her presentation, where we are reaching out to communities in the Rohingya camp, finding what are the protection risks they are facing, and then how to kind of link them with different service providers so that they can access those services. Then it's also about identification. And then we are also involved in legal counseling for Rohingya communities. We have a smaller education program, but I must say that it has been quite innovative program, especially given the challenges what we have in Bangladesh, where we don't really have government approval on formal education. And as I mentioned, the space constraint is a big issue. And that's where IRC found a very innovative way to roll out this education program, which is primarily around digital learning and home-based digital learning. So, we have tablets, and we have trained facilitators who goes house to house, and they have like a 10 kids group, and they take them through a 120 module system, which is somewhere between grade 1 to grade 5. So quite innovative program in the current context, and now we are planning to scale it up at large level. So these are the program what we are working on. We have, as I mentioned, like we have reached out to around 350,000 altogether clients, and out of that 68% are female clients. We have a funding portfolio of $20 million, of course, from institutional donor, but there are a lot of private donors who have provided us assistance, and especially the education program, which I was talking about, purely supported by the private donors. We have various offices, like 3 field offices and 52 different type of facilities. And we have close to 400 staff, out of which I'm really happy to say that we have almost 60% female staff, and they are really working quite hard in the Rohingya context. And we are also working with local partners. So it's also part of, the capacity building efforts for the local NGO, but also to learn from them because they have been working there for quite long. So this is in a nutshell the IRC program from Bangladesh. Thank you very, very much.
And last but not least, Undariya will do a snapshot of why we are driving such a strong gender agenda in IRC, not only in Asia, but also globally.
Thank you. Thank you. So equality is an organizational value for IRC, along with integrity, service, and accountability. And gender equality for us is a strategic outcome that cuts across all our programs, whether it is health, education, ensuring safety and protection, whether it is empowerment and economic well-being. And to achieve this outcome, we have a two-pronged strategy. On one hand, as you have already heard from Manish and Adnan, gender mainstreaming and really making a concerted effort to ensure that we are reaching out to women, girls, as well as severely marginalized groups like transgender communities and people with disabilities, to ensure that we are serving everyone equally, but also that we are really reaching the most marginalized people who are most at risk. And of course, sadly, given patriarchal realities, women and girls, as well as transgender people, bear the brunt of gender-based discrimination and violence. Therefore, we also have gender-specific programs that are focused specifically on women and girls, and little by little also transgender communities. So here on this picture, I wanted to share with you, I mean, there is so much. You can see that our programming is quite extensive. What you see on this photo is women and girls in Mela camp in Thailand. And that's where we have refugees from Myanmar, from different ethnic groups, Kareni, Karen, also Muslim. And they are making soap. And interestingly, market research by our team showed that soap, liquid soap, and shampoo were some of the most sought after items in the camps, and this is before COVID. So the soap making skills are not just for hygiene, although they are important, particularly in COVID response, as you can imagine, but they also enable women and girls to meet their own needs for soap and detergent, shampoo, and their families, but also sell the surplus so they make some income to supplement their food rations, but also for some of them, it enables them to remove themselves from abusive relationships. And the Girl Shine project that was mentioned earlier is, I think for me, one of the most dynamic examples of our work. And it includes a fairly comprehensive range of activities that provide psychosocial support, life skills, as you can see here, and other kinds of skills. So I wanted to share with you some information that came out from an assessment of a pilot Girl Shine project in Myanmar. The girls who were involved in the project reported that they had improved personal relationships, that their personal relationships have improved through this program. Their social skills were enhanced, and they reported increased knowledge about sexual and reproductive health. Also, an improved sense of confidence and ability to manage their emotions during stressful situations. And when we are talking about adolescent girls, that includes also teenage mothers. And in some of the camp contexts, for example, in Thailand, in predominantly Christian communities, girls who become pregnant, deliver children while being unmarried before the age of 15 are particularly vulnerable because they are seen as having brought shame onto the family, and they are often abused by their families as well as their communities. So working with these girls, including them in these programs, also not only empowers them, but also helps their social inclusion. And of course, a very important goal through all of this is reduction of risk of violence and facilitating, supporting girls' well-being as they transition to adulthood. I will move into what gender equality means for us internally. We recognize that if we want to see gender equality in our programs, we ourselves have to walk the talk, and we have to be a gender equitable organization ourselves internally. So we have, we make efforts to ensure gender balance in staffing at different levels, as you have heard from Manish. And we also support and enable women to have women at work groups so that they can come together as women, talk about their issues. And this is particularly important in some of the very heavily male-dominated cultural and organizational contexts. Gender equality champions are our colleagues who want to make an extra effort and dedicate portion of their time to really driving organizational culture transformation to align with our values of gender equality, diversity, and inclusion, and also training programs, awareness raising programs, and capacity building on equality, inclusion, and diversity. And a very important component of our internal efforts is awareness raising on sexual harassment as well as safeguarding from sexual violence and exploitation, and creating a zero tolerance culture, culturally as well as procedurally. Next slide, Sanna. The last thing I wanted to highlight was that innovation is really important for us. And oftentimes I find people think, oh, again, they're talking about gender equality, men, women, what else is new? And the conversation, we want to foster really meaningful, dynamic conversations that not only deepen people's understanding of gender dynamics and gendered power dynamics and power inequalities, but also bring our staff closer together and strengthen our teams. So the Asia Regional initiative was to develop this, what we came to call Gaming for Gender Equality Interactive Package, which is called Masawat, which means equality in Urdu. And this name was proposed, we did announced sort of a competition among our staff, and one of our gender equality champions from Pakistan suggested this name. So this interactive package consists of, as you can see on the left, there are 2 packages, and these are actually card games. 2 card games, one based on open-ended questions, the other one gives specific situations and then reactions, and these are conversation starters for staff. They can play these games on the road trip or during staff retreats or during breaks. And they can also take it to their communities and families and friends. And what you see on the right side in the corner is a snapshot of the interactive web site that we developed to accompany the card games. So I think this is, in a gist, it's actually hard to wrap up a lot of the work that we are doing within just a few minutes. But thank you for this opportunity to share our work. Over to you, Sanna.
Thank you. Yes, there is a million of things to talk about who we are and what we do, and we're looking forward to your questions. So in 2033, we will be 100 years. We would then have walked in the footsteps of the amazing Albert Einstein, who used his intellect, but also big heart, to really put focus on the most vulnerable groups. For us as an organization, we want to be able to do more. And of course, that means that we always looking for money, that we should never shy away from that. That's maybe not the first thing, but you know, the world goes around. So we always look for creative, collaborative ways to work with the private sector, with governments, with institutional donors. But most importantly, people who are fleeing, people who are living as displaced, they are not anyone we need to help or rescue. We are not rescuing them because we think they are powerless. We rescue them because they have taken the first step to rescue themselves, to find a new life, to protect their families. So what we really want to bring forward is that the 80 million people who are living in refugee-like situation or on flee or have fled today, they are brave. They are enormously strong. And the least we can do as fellow human beings is to stand by them, assure that we as IRC are delivering high quality program. We are reaching as many as we can. We take what we learn to the global arena to try to change and influence governments. And we are looking forward to work with all of you who is on this presentation. And from the bottom of our heart, on behalf of David, we say thank you for your interest and very happy to answer any questions or reflections you have on what we have said. So thank you.
Sanna, thank you, and thank you to everybody. You've provided us an absolute feast of information. It's fascinating to hear both what the organisation is trying to do overall, but particularly in terms of some of the detailed programs that are occurring in countries and on specific issues like gender, etc. Before I go to audience questions, we don't have much time, but perhaps if I could just start, and it's a very sort of general question. I mean, clearly there are significant problems in terms of refugees and internally displaced people, but I just wonder, perhaps a twofold question: what do you feel can be done to get countries to take more refugees? And given the difficulties on exclusion and diversity that you've alluded to, I just wonder how positive you are about the extent to which social attitudes are changing in Asia on some of these issues.
I will take a first step. I think, first of all, we need to make sure that our fellow countrymen, wherever we live, realize that refugees who are coming is not a threat. They are actually an asset. They come with great knowledge. They can be, as we are, contributed to our own society's development. And I think that if we manage to be part of that change in perception, things will be easier. Clearly, today there is a big fear, not only in Europe, but in the US, of course, but also in countries in Asia, of that the refugees will take over, they will lose job and all of that. So I think that we need to give a sense of why people have fled, why they are staying, but also how they can contribute. In terms of the perception in the region about the situation, I don't know, Manish or Adnan, do you want to take that question as you're from the region?
So if you look at, Bangladesh context, we have the 1 million plus Rohingya refugees who are living in one district, and there has been constant, discussion, dialogue between Bangladesh government as well as, the Rohingya community and larger humanitarian community, that how we can really allow Rohingya to at least have the basic human rights, because as I mentioned, they are stateless people. Neither Myanmar government recognize them as their citizen, nor Bangladesh government call them as refugees, so they don't really have any rights. And so here we are talking about basic human rights. A child, like last 3 years, somewhere around 150,000 children born, and they don't have any identity. So just such an unfortunate situation in 2020, a large population who could have been very, very productive, very useful, is not contributing at all. And rather it is actually detrimental now, because they are confined in a very small area and they are not able to contribute for their own community, but also for larger context in Bangladesh. So that's where I think I would like to complement what Sanna was saying. It's really important, first of all, we understand the basic human rights issues, that they have they have certain rights that has to be respected, but then at the same time, how productively we can use them, because they are not going to go soon. They are going to stay there for a long time. We don't really see any possibility of repatriation in foreseeable future. So how best we can utilize this large population more productive way. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Hugo, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. So it's two kind of questions. The first question is, I'm a final year economics student. I'm going into the field of development and kind of relief projects around the world. I was wondering if you have any advice for how to kind of get into the field, how to help out. I'm happy to do anything of any kind at any level, but just trying to get your foot through the door in the first step. And the second question is a particular area that I have interest in, is the impact climate change will have on mass immigration and refugees from around the world. I believe that around the equator, as the climate starts to heat up, some areas become quite unlivable. You'll have mass famines and so on, and you'll see mass immigration. What do you think we can do now to try and solve that? Less on the kind of stopping climate change, but more on the, is there anything we can put our efforts into to support individuals in building up their homes or livelihoods, or supporting that maybe crop yields or things like that? Yeah, those are kind of my two main questions. Thank you.
Yeah, a good advice from us to enter our sector. It's clear that the old type of solidarity work, where you could go out and be, you know, go and spend a year, it's reducing. It's not much of that any longer. But I think the field you have chosen, finance, is really important. I think that, you know, you could be hired any day, because finances is one of those brilliant tools. They work literally the same wherever you go. Go into PwC or working for AstraZeneca, or you come and work with us as International Rescue Committee. We need to be better in assuring that we are spending every dollar or every pound in the best possible way. When we hire, we look at the whole person. Of course, it's really important what kind of academic background you have, but it's also equally important to see if you have been engaged, be it in local NGOs, have been standing outside, doing at times even protests. But it's actually very important just to show an engagement and an understanding, and more importantly, that we work side by side. We are not the old days savior. We are there to take our skills with the local skill or the national skills which is available. In terms of the climate impact, needless to say, Asia is enormously impacted of climate. We have a very good example in Pakistan now, how we have engaged with the local community, very hands-on in what we would call disaster risk reduction and resilience work. So Adnan, would you like to just say a few words what we have done and what we think is important to do?
Absolutely. I think it's just quickly, I think we are on time here. It's more about behavioral change and awareness. I think so. One part is the hard component, training and stuff, but I think we also, what we did in most part of the Pakistan with the help of a lot of donors, is to change the approach and mindset around how do people perceive the changes in the climate, whether it's livelihoods, agriculture, water levels, flooding. So the places that people want to live have been living. So I think it starts with the awareness raising, and then working with the government and the local communities and the local actors in trying to devise the strategies and interventions innovatively that could help them change according to the changes in the climate and the patterns and behavior. So for the last 4.5 years, we have worked in schools, in the communities, in agriculture, finance sectors, with the government, building dams, shelters, raised platform, training people on rescue and response. So all that bit. So I think what one of the achievements or the successes that we have is not only that people have awareness, they can trigger and see how things are progressing, but have also adopted to the changes in their practices, whether it's livelihood, society, social. So that change is critical in terms of moving forward. As you said, Hugo, we cannot stop the climate change. We can, Of course, that's more at the broader level, but at the government's level. But at the local level, it's how to adopt and use the resources more efficiently and effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to squeeze one more. We are over time, but we'll squeeze one more question from Sunil. If you'd like to ask your question, please.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Roddy. Thanks, Sanna, Adnan, Manish, and Undariya for a fascinating presentation on a very sad topic, really. My question is very quickly and very simplistically. The refugees come because of two reasons, both originating from the West. One is a trigger-happy West, and the second is a greedy West. So the war refugees and the environmental refugees are as a result of our doing. How can you make the West do more? And you talked about private donations, private funding, but how can the Western governments do more? That was my first question. And the second question is, how can you make the enlightened West, people like me, people like Western people, think more correctly and not have wrong concepts, partly answered earlier through the answer. But how can people be more aware of the problem that we have created and how we can solve it? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You know, Western governments, I mean, we are always very appreciative of governments. I mean, for the support they show. There are multiple governments, especially I would say in North Europe, who are dedicating 1% of the GDP towards development aid. There are, though, unfortunately, others who are not. So I think if we can join forces with yourself and many others to actually say that we are willing to repair what we started with colonization and long before that, the challenges we are facing today, I think that is really important. So it's purely actually pushing, doing advocacy and standing up and say, we stand with our sisters and brothers globally to ensure that we all have an equal and fair opportunity for life, and thereby dedicate a bit more of our wealth. I think it's important to work with the private sector. The private sector has a very important role to play also in the countries where we can say in Bangladesh, or be it even in China, in India and elsewhere, minimum wages is not enough. They do enormously harm to the environment where they operate. They can also be actors of change, because governments who might be more reluctant to democracy and rights, they do listen to finance. So I think it's also a big obligation to our private sector companies and colleagues there to actually stand up for minimum wage, assure work conditions, assure that they are paying taxes, and that their taxes are reaching the population in the countries they are working in. Enlightening ourselves. Life is a lifelong learning route, and I think we need to assure that we constantly are listening to news, participating in great events here as the Scottish Institute have organized, read, and really also talk to neighbors. Talk to the neighbor who you know comes from another part of the world. Talk with mom, talk with dad, talk with sisters and brothers about experiences and what they know. It's a way to go. And then of course, always reading.
Sanna, thank you very much indeed. We're sort of well past the hour here, so I'm going to close. I think I might have Roddy on. He might want to say a couple of words as well. But clearly, thank you very much indeed for everything that you've covered today. What the IRC is doing globally is amazing. But when you see the figures in Asia, particularly the IDP and the refugees, and of course, as we've referred to, the impact from climate and the social challenges that you've alluded, you can recognize why we were so keen to cover this issue here with the Institute, because it's affecting Asia so significantly. But I'd like really to extend my thanks to Sanna, Adnan, Manish, and Undariya for your excellent presentations and sharing this information with us today. And we wish the IRC all the best in your future work. So thank you very much indeed. And I don't know if, Roddy, if you can come in, if there's anything you would wish to say.
Can you hear me, Doug, or not?
Oh, we can, yes.
Okay, well, I'd like to say that I've been listening on my iPhone here in America to the discussions and the presentations, which have been enormously helpful and very interesting. You deal with, Sanna and the team, such an important underlying series of problems affecting the world and, of course, Pan-Asia. And in a world where at the moment we seem to be moving towards isolationism and nationalism, your activities are a great clarion call for people around the world to come together and support what you're doing and address the underlying challenges of famine and abuse and climate, which are driving people to take these awful and challenging steps with their families at great risk to move from their homelands to other countries or to try and find a way of surviving. So on behalf of everybody at the Asia Scotland Institute, please pass on our thanks to David for his excellent film at the beginning of the presentation. And thank you so much for opening our eyes on this hugely important topic, which will, I know, be something that we will talk about in the months to come. So on behalf of the Asia Scotland Institute, thank you also from me.
Thank you.